Thank you. All right. Excellent. So, good evening, everybody. Welcome again to Friends, Food, and Faith. For those online watching, still, that's always good to have you here too. Even though you can't join the food, you can still join the Friends of the Faith, so that's good. It's I was kind of racking my brain, and I was just praying about this morning about what to talk about, and it kind of came to me. It's like, well, you know, there's been a lot of talk, especially in the light of what we call the strategic planning sessions. So, as you guys well know, maybe you don't know, there's been discussion about what the future of the Archdiocese is looking like, and some of the things that they're looking at, some of the criteria, they're still trying to develop it right now. But really what they've been emphasizing at our diocesan level is what we call evangelization, right? So that's kind of what we're talking about. What does that mean? How have we got to this point, maybe in the Archdiocese, and not just locally, but also as a church universally? I mean, it's interesting that there's been some population shifts that primarily the Catholic Church has grown over these last centuries, of course. Even now, it's still rather large compared to other denominations, even other religions. But primarily in like first world countries, it's kind of shrunk. And so we're going to talk tonight about maybe why that is, and maybe what some solutions can be, not just locally but universally, of how we can actually evangelize and maybe keep that number from sliding any farther down, and hopefully get it to increase a little bit. It was funny, I was talking earlier with Paul. That's kind of ironic. This discussion kind of came to me just because here locally at St. Gabriel Parish, we actually have an increase in compared to previous years of the number coming in the church. So right now we have about 10 people for sure, possibly even 11 that will be coming into the church fully in the spring. So that's a relatively large number, not only for South City Parish, but I understand here at St. Gabriel in general. So great news. That's awesome news. So does that mean that we're doing everything right here, and that's just kind of how it goes? Or
I think it's because we're doing everything.
That could be, very well could be. I'm not going to say it's not. But why are we so lucky, and maybe other parishes surrounding us, even bigger parishes like out in maybe what we call mission territory, are not? So we can maybe talk about that a little bit and see compare and contrast, or maybe just kind of look at certain things and even brainstorm maybe certain strategies that we can have to better evangelize to people and bring them closer to Jesus, right? That's the whole goal. Not necessarily conversion, right, to the Catholic Church, but that we grow closer to Jesus. In context, it's always interesting that people ask like what the main jobs of the priest of the pastor is. And as not being a pastor, I don't have this responsibility, but I will hopefully soon. The job of a pastor is to bring everybody in their territory closer to Jesus. And they're going to be judged on how well they do that. And not just the Catholic souls, all the souls in that person's territory. Same with archbishops, bishops. Their job is to bring people in their territory closer to Jesus. And when they're standing before a Lord, they're going to be judged based on that criteria. And they expand even further, the Holy Father. Well, his job is to get all rational beings closer to heaven, right? He'll be judged based on that. Praise God, we've had a lot of good saints so far, so I guess this is a good track record. I guess they're doing as well so far. But that's really the main job of a clergy. But that job doesn't just limit to people that are ordained, right? That job is actually an action of the common priesthood that we're all baptized into. We all have a role in bringing people closer to Jesus, bringing them closer into the church, right? And not forcing, not proselytizing. That's not what we're talking about here. It's engaging in a rational way to help people to see the truth for what it truly is, right? That we understand the fullness of that truth resides in the Catholic Church, and it's our job to help people see that truth for what it truly is, right? Coming directly from our Lord. So, with that being said, I'm going to share some of my screen here. So bear with me as we go, just because I have some facts and figures to kind of start off our conversation off with. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Yes, my desktop. Share. Great. Okay, can everyone see that online and whatnot? I kind of want to start with this first thing. There's every week the clergy get an email from the Curia with certain facts and figures and data. So this one is kind of an interesting one. It's kind of sad in a way. So I don't want to depress. It's not supposed to be depressing, right? But this is just the truth and the reality of where we're living right now, especially here in the Archdiocese. And what's happening in the Archdiocese is kind of common in many of their dioceses around the United States and in what we call maybe the Western world. So even in Europe, parts of Asia, and of course here in the United States, the Western Hemisphere, we're seeing this kind of trend. And what this shows, and maybe I can blow this up a little bit for you, I don't know. Oh, I didn't do that. What this shows is statistics, and it's a chart. Let's try to zoom in on that one, can't we? Okay. This is showing the percentage of Catholic households who are registered to the parish in whose boundaries they live. So this one is not maybe as important, but what this kind of shows is, all right, there in 2004, there were 70% of people living in the parish boundary registered in that parish, right? Now in 2021, we're down 59% from just 15 years ago, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a loss of Catholics. It just means the registration has not been, really maintained, right? So people may be registered in other parishes, not live in the boundary. That's all that graph is really showing. What's kind of interesting though is this next graph. Percent of Catholic households who are registered in the parish in whose boundary they live. Oh wait, no, that's not. Well, that's kind of the same thing. But you see, what this kind of indicates though is that there is a decrease in those registrations. Now, why is that kind of important, or what did maybe that indicate in reality?
People aren't going to church.
Well, not necessarily, because like I said, Paul, it could be possible people register in other parishes but not living in that boundary, right?
They're just not registering.
Yeah, it could be just that,
That
right?
would show up in another parish, though.
It would, right? And so what that would indicate is that, but then we're not showing what parishes outside the boundary here, are we? So all we're saying is so this goes back to 1959. So this was 59, this is 2004. But since 1959, there's been kind of the same kind of decrease. About 59% where we're at now, compared to 89% in 1959. Here we're at 70% down to 59.1. So there's been kind of a similar decrease over the last, almost 60 years now. Does that mean people aren't going to mass? I mean, people aren't. Well, I think what it really indicates, and this is maybe what the data would show, is that people aren't engaged in their parish church anymore, right? So, okay, well, or at least a lot of people are not engaged in the parish where they live anymore. What may be some pros and cons of that?
Well, you could go in a lot of different directions.
You could.
I'm just thinking the mental health of the community and the spiritual health of people and their happiness and their connectivity.
Yeah, so that's right. If you take the raw numbers, what you're looking at here is like, wow, there's parishes boundaries don't really necessarily matter, but that indicates that there's not necessarily a focus on the community as much, right?
And you're seeing that in other organizations as well.
Right. Right.
Lions, Optimus, Rotary, all
Yeah.
groups.
Now, part of that could be because, well, as you know, the Earth has gotten a little bit flatter. Not that we're flat earthers, not that the Earth is round. Let me clear that up right now. But because of the communications, because of maybe the way people live these days, it's not so much of an issue to maybe live across the country and commute back and forth, or commute in different areas because of just the way technology has advanced in transportation, communication, and these other things. So what that kind of indicates is that people are not necessarily staying in their hometowns after they graduate from high school, college, whatever. They're tending to go out. And if we look at maybe our children, our grandchildren, maybe people have got, some of our young adults, I know personally, I can attest to this too, that's the case. I wanted to stay in St. Louis personally, but I just couldn't, right? The job market was not in a state where I could sustain myself in a good way. My parents were supportive, and they would kept me in their house, I'm sure, as long as I needed. But I needed to go out on my own. And with my generation, I think there was kind of this expansion that you didn't necessarily have to stay where you lived. I think in other generations, there was this mindset that once you graduate high school, you would find a job or maybe go to college in the same area where you lived. And then you basically live your entire life within that community. What we've kind of seen in a trend, not just in the church, but secularly, is most people don't stay where they grew up anymore. They go to different areas. And what that means is they're not necessarily bound now by these, boundaries locally, right? And so that kind of goes in mindset, well, maybe I don't necessarily have to go to Mass where I live anymore. I can maybe find a Catholic church or a church in general that really appeals to me. I can start going to Mass there, right? I mean, registered even though I don't live in that boundary. Now, canon law is very, very clear about that the pastor needs to be involved where you live. So if you have residence within a boundary, the pastor has to actually give permission for you to actually leave that boundary to go and become associated with other parish. It's kind of very informal. It's not really like a huge process, right? It's kind of just more formality than anything else nowadays. But back in the day, that was kind of a big deal, especially when you had maybe more ethnic parishes, right, that were established. Here in St. Louis, we're notorious for having many different churches, but they were all directed towards certain ethnicities or backgrounds or cultures. And so it was really kind of very, very weird if you were in a German parish because you're German and you want to go down the street to the Irish parish and actually start going to Mass there. Not only was that necessarily like, kind of a big deal, but also could cause issues, right? Not only for you, but also maybe for the German parish or Irish parish you're moving into, right? And so that had to be a little bit more discerned in those circumstances. Nowadays, it's not as much a big deal, right? Because we have so many parishes, you can go to wherever you want, and it's not really an issue, right? The pastor is always notified of these things and communicated with, and still has to get permission, but it's not as big as an issue it may have been 50, 60 years ago. Okay. So yeah, I mean, so part of that is it's not really necessarily a centralized. Does it indicate that there's a dying parish? Well, maybe, maybe not, right? Possibly. I think what it really kind of indicates, though, is that there's this lack of a parochial understanding of the way things running work, and that can be very good, right? Because even though the church has territories, the church also wants people to have the freedom to worship where they feel most comfortable, most welcome, right? Most in a community. And that doesn't necessarily have to be your local parish, but it's probably best if it is. And there are reasons why that would be the case. For instance, you probably live in an area where you have very similar cultural or even like economic backgrounds, right? So it's just a more harmonious grouping, right, than if you're going somewhere else. Ethnic, cultural, as we stated before. So there are definitely pros and cons. Kind of the nice thing about not having parochialism is that you kind of have those open boundaries and be more involved with other people and kind of have that more of a dynamic development and growth. Some of the disadvantages, though, is parochialism is kind of nice because it does actually build up communities, right? There's a sense of community around that was always kind of hovered around a parish church. And so the center of the life for that neighborhood or that community was usually the parish church. And growing up, there probably would have been, and Marilyn could probably answer this too, there may have been like dances and sporting events and all these social aspects that were happening at the church you wouldn't really necessarily find anywhere else. Am I kind of close on that one, Marilyn, do you think, or what?
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how accurate that data is, because I know a lot of the families here at St. Gabe's are registered here and the kids go to school here, but they go to Mass somewhere else because they like the music or they like the priest.
Yeah, and that's
and they can fussy and maybe somewhere else.
And that also it can raise some good things and bad things too. So like what was actually very fascinating, this study before Christmas, I was just kind of curious. And I looked at all the families that were go to the school here. And 1/3 of the families do not live in the parish boundary. And to that point, Lisa, like Okay, you don't see them come to mass every Sunday, but maybe they're going somewhere else. But that raises other questions. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, right? Where's the accountability? I don't know. I think Marilyn used to tell a story about when the nuns would count them, or my mom and dad would tell these stories when they were in grade school. The nuns would actually go to mass on Sunday. They would actually check to see if their kids were there, right?
That was a bit before me.
Yeah, okay. Well, no, well, my parents were after you. I'm pretty sure they got the same thing, but that kind of would happen in certain parishes, you know. So that raises some questions. Again, I always try to assume the best, that even though I may not see these parents, these families on Sunday, they may be going somewhere else. I think that's a charitable assumption, right? So
That's pretty charitable.
well, I think it's just interesting to kind of talk about these things because it's good to kind of see this data. It doesn't necessarily indicate that there's a problem, but it does kind of show that there's been a shift, at least in the mentality of what is a parish, what defines a parish, how does a parish actually kind of work. Now this one might be a little bit more telling into that. So in addition to that, I don't know if you guys know this, but every October, every parish in the Archdiocese takes attendance numbers. And some of you might see the ushers with like counters, right? Well, that's what they're doing. All the masses in October, they're counting how many people are coming to mass, right? And so this next data kind of shows that from this past year. Now, I want to take this with a grain of salt, right? Because this last year and the year before that may not have been the most indicative of what mass attendance has been. But we do get some very interesting percentages here. So on average, throughout the Archdiocese, on the 4 weekends, or at least this kind of was showing the change in coming back over the course of those weekends, right? So this includes live stream views, worshipers, and virtual and physical and virtual attendance, so combined.
Is that the actual date, 11, 12, 13, or is that the year?
So this is October of 2011, 12,
Okay.
13. So you can see the percentage of mass attendance by those registered in 2011, just 10 years ago, was 32%. You see, it didn't really fluctuate too much. It started kind of a decreasing trend. And then October of 20, 12.5, right? But then it got to crank up again for another 8%, right? Now, so it's already been kind of a downward trend. We went from basically about a third of people coming to mass that were registered to then basically a fifth of that, right? So a pretty significant decrease. October 20, I don't know if you really take that, but what that indicates is how many people are actually coming back after the pandemic, right? And again, those numbers, they seem kind of sad, especially if you look at the combined physical and virtual attendance. In 20 it was 37.8, and in 21 it was 27.8. And so that's combined. So we're losing basically a 10% decrease over this last year.
But October 20 is the highest overall because of, I guess, the virtual.
Well, the virtual is, yeah, so 9.2 and
Because
25,
collectively
right?
it's 37.8.
So there's 9.2, that I don't know if you can take that into consideration just because, well,
Oh, views and
9.2,
worship.
right?
Yeah, that's
So this one might be a better, the 25.3 might be a better indicator of what actually is happening there. And you see that decreases next year because people are coming in person, you would imagine.
right.
So when did the Archbishop say you don't have to go, and when did he say you have to?
Yeah,
come
so
back?
the dispensation was put in place March of 2020, right? So actually March 18th, I believe, is the first day where it was said that for 2 months straight, it was said, don't come to mass, don't come to the church. And it opened up again in May of that same year. So based on about 2 or 3 months, mass would be done just by the priest, maybe had a server. Maybe if you're lucky enough, you get in there early enough, you get in and actually have the 10 or 5 that was allowed. And then that didn't change until May. Then the doors were open. The dispensation was still in place, and that wasn't lifted until the following year. So July of 2021 when the dispensation was taken out of effect. Now we can talk about, well, was that a wise thing to do? Was that really a good thing to do? I, being as old as I am and being present at that moment, I think it was a good idea because of what we knew, which was nothing really, how this thing spread, how it was affecting people, who it really was affecting. And so obviously as a scientific approach, it's always good to do the most conservative thing, right, within the lack of data. So with that, I think that was a good call then. Then as data became more available, the dispensation was still put in place because we still want to protect our most vulnerable, right? But because also there was a practical side of that that's saying that there would be people who probably were vulnerable that would still come to mass anyway, if that was explicitly stated. I'm sure probably some of them are here today. I don't know. I would imagine. Because I don't know, maybe you can tell me, would you think there would be people that would come, wind up, come to mass, and maybe even expose themselves to harm if the dispensation wasn't explicitly stated? What do we think? I think there would have been.
Some people may have.
I think
I know one that way.
I think you have if you have the 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock crowd, right? They would have come no matter what. Right.
Yep.
Those are probably the people that would be most vulnerable to getting the disease.
They also come if there's ice and snow.
Yes, exactly.
But more than likely, they don't go well, except for the people who are working, they don't go anywhere else.
Right,
And
right,
some of those people may not even have access to online streaming.
Right.
That's a concern.
yes. And so there was a lot of that was being weighed, right? I mean, the whole reason we started doing it was because of that reason, right? Could we make it more available to people, right? So you're talking about for basically a year and 3 months that there was a dispensation in place that you do not have to go to mass. Didn't give any limitation on that, or it didn't say because of the disease, it didn't say because of fear. It was just blanket, right? And part of that pastorally was a way of alleviating people's consciences so they wouldn't feel guilty about it, right? I can tell you, it was amazing how people confessed that in the confessional over the course of that time. Just because I think there was a level like, oh, well, I mean, I probably could come, but I didn't. And what I keep on saying is, well, it's good you have that desire, but it's not a sin because there's no obligation.
However, they thought it was a sin.
They did.
And I
Because-
thought if you think it's a sin, it's a sin.
And in the circumstances, in different, it probably would have been, right? Because circumstances really define that as well. But because there's no obligation, there's no sin if you don't go. Now, if the bishop would have said, because if you were to have a fear or vulnerability from the disease, and that's the only reason why you shouldn't come to mass, okay, that's a whole different story. But there was never those stipulations put on the dispensation. Now, people may ask, well, should there have been in the first place? Well, here's the thing. Law would state that you can dispense yourself from going to mass for legitimate reasons. And fear of dying is a legitimate reason. We would even say that someone who, if you had a foot of snow in front of your house and you were snowed in, you're not obligated to mass because the danger you may inflict upon yourself or others by trying to get the mass. That's a reasonable justification to say I shouldn't go, right? The circumstances do matter. But I'm just showing this because it kind of shows the trend of mass attendance in the kind of a microcosm what was happening at the same time period, right? So even though, so we see a drop in registrations in parishes, we see a drop in attendance.
Even on the best years, it was 70% missing.
I mean, right. And this is 2011. So maybe,
Yeah.
but now maybe 40 years ago, that may number, obviously there was a higher number.
Yeah, what do they gauge? What's the benchmark of like
Well, I mean,
number
so
registered versus number? that
that's
showed
kind of
up,
primarily what they're looking
probably?
about. That's kind of primarily what they're looking at. So you would think that if you're registered in a parish, you go into that parish
Mhm.
for mass. And so the counters are counting basically. Now, you're right. What throws that number off is maybe you have visitors. Like we had the 6 o'clock and 5:30 mass, right? It was 6 o'clock, now it's 5:30. Primarily, a lot of those attending those masses weren't always parishioners because that's the last chance mass.
Mhm.
And so you may get a lot of people from outside the boundary come to that mass because, well, I slept in or I had to work or
The snow
whatever.
melted by then.
What's that?
The snow melted.
The snow melted by then, whatever it may be. That would definitely maybe skew that number for us personally. But you think that would even out though, compared to all the parishes throughout the diocese. And that's kind of this showing is the average, right? So So we have a decrease in registrations, decrease in mass attendance. So what does that tell us then? It looks that way. We're going to a smaller and smaller church, right?
Did they conduct any surveys of why people are?
Yeah, and here's yeah, we'll do that in 1 second. So the next one we'll look at is these. So this came from this year. And here are the top 5 parish boundaries and kind of change in population. So they take it looking at the parish territories is the largest percentage growth in population. What's interesting, all these places are like
County.
well,
County.
yeah, I mean, you're talking about St. Charles,
Yeah.
right? Except for St. John the Apostle and Evangelist. That one's interesting because that one actually has had an increase over time, even though they only have 1 mass on Sunday.
Where's that? Is that the big one down on Green?
No, this is down on around Keener Plaza across from Kiel Center, the Kiel Opera House. It's actually minor basilica of the diocese. I don't know if people know that much, but it's a very small church. They used to have a daily mass at noon, and they have not. They've reduced now. I think maybe 2 masses, maybe 1 mass on Sunday. But you see, they've had an increase of 51% in the last 10 years, which is odd.
That's because there are fewer masses, so the one they're counting has more people.
Well, you would think. I don't know. That could be.
I don't know, you think it's a migration of people moving back downtown?
Well, that could be too,
Yeah. I think
right? That could be too. But here, what's funny though is like the old cathedral, which is only less than a mile away from that, going farther east on Market. They have 5 masses on Sunday. But still, regardless, this is actually in the same parish boundary. Now, St. John the Baptist may be including the cathedral because that's part of their boundary. So that's kind of it. Maybe that's why too, right? So increase. So it has mass attendance. This is concentration. So they also break down to more ethnicities, especially Asian and Hispanic. So you can see it's kind of funny that city North County is getting a lot of Hispanic people. Asians are kind of more in U City, West County. So the largest decline, all St. Louis City parishes, right? And that's funny because it's not necessarily funny, but I mean, it kind of indicates that what's happening in the secular way, that you have a population shift, right? So again, with the largest populations are all in west and north, decrease in population are all in city. So then you have the smallest populations are here. And so that just kind of gives you an overview of where the population shift has gone.
Do you know what the St. Gabriel numbers look like?
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, there is a map. As we're doing pretty well as compared to the rest of the city.
Population is pretty or maybe even growing.
Well, it's probably more evened out. What actually shows is that the population actually in this part of the city, we've been 40% Catholic for quite a long time. The rest of the city has kind of decreased over time. So this like Epiphany and us are kind of put together in this area, and I didn't get a copy of that map, but that was sent out to recently. But that was what was being indicated in those maps. So it was kind of fascinating to see that. Compared to other parishes, are actually probably higher in the higher range. Even like in St. Charles, it was certainly because like we look like compared percentage wise. So like for instance, like here in this parish compared to maybe like the percentage out in like St. Joe Cottleville or maybe like ICD, it's comparable as far as percentage is concerned, but the total number of those is much bigger out there than here, right? Because there's just a population shift out there. So that's how it goes. Yeah.
Our sister parish, St. Matthew, I guess that was, unless there's another St. Matthew, the decline in population, which
Well, again, North
Of course
City,
they have-
right, yeah, and that's just been a trend that's been going the last really 40, 50 years. Right.
Did they ever study the age groups of people going to? mass?
Yeah, they do. I think those have a number. I'd have to pull those up, right? Obviously the median age has gone up, right, of mass attendance. And again, that's again a mean average, that's an average over all the areas. But like you take, for instance, my home parish, Immaculate Heart of Mary, right? That used to be it used to be comparable to here in St. Gabriel, right? Younger families, all going to mass. Now it's primarily, I think the median age of mass attenders in their late 60s, early 70s. Not to say there aren't young families in that territory, it's just that they're not either not Catholic, not going to mass, or whatever. So they have something about those studies. Now you asked a question, Lisa, about have there been studies about why these things are happening? Well, yeah, and I don't think there's necessarily a one size fits all answer. The answers for that are probably just as many as the reasons why population shifts or why people aren't going to mass. Primarily, I think what it comes down to is a lack of catechesis. And when I say catechesis, lack of teaching about why is important to go to mass. And that's not just here in St. Louis. I think that's more of a general in the first world of why that's not important. What's very interesting is you tend to see an increase in population in faith, like growth in faith, where there's tragedy and where there's crisis, right? And so that's why you see in like Africa, Asia, God knows how many Catholics are actually in China. I mean, there could be, for all we know, 1 billion Catholics in China, right? Because those numbers are hidden because they don't want people to know because of the persecution and the problems that will come from that from the government, right? Similar to how it was maybe like in Poland and Russia during the communist, dictatorship of those areas, right? And so the numbers aren't necessarily maybe even completely accurate either because of that. But in those places, we do know there's been a population growth in the church. Whereas places like in Europe, in this hemisphere, especially, in more modernized countries, there's been a precipitous decrease, right? And part of that could be people don't necessarily see a reason when people are content, they don't necessarily see a reason to go to God, right? I think that's primarily what it is. We live in a very comfortable country in life. As many problems as we have in this country or in this hemisphere or in this culture, we're still pretty well off compared to the poorest person in Bangladesh or India or Africa or China, right? Even our poorest are probably still better off than the poorest in those other countries. So that has something to do with it. I think there's been a decline in recognition of what the faith not only does for society, but also the faith can do individually. It's interesting. I've really done a lot of discernment about this and praying about it, and the church doesn't necessarily definitively teach this, but I think there's something to this philosophically. That a lot of times there's been this you hear this kind of refrain from people, especially in the younger generations, my generation included, that I'm spiritual and not religious. And religiosity is not really looked at as a virtue anymore. When in reality, it actually is a virtue of justice. It's giving God what God is due. That's actually is a virtue of religious, being someone or piety. It's actually you can never give back to God what he's due from us. But piety is good because it actually engages you in a relationship with God, so you can grow in that faith, grow in the other virtues, right? And so religion, I think, is definitely a means to that faith, that goodness coming from God. But also religion is a way of life that causes happiness here and now. I think that's missed by a lot of people. People say, well, if I know there's a God, I have faith in God. Great. Do you go to mass or do you engage in your liturgy in your particular tradition? Oh no. Well, why not? Well, I believe in God. That's not. Okay, are you happy? I think that's the next question to ask, right? And I think if anyone who's discerning properly and really reflecting on it, would honestly say, you know, I probably could be happier, right? And that's true. Even religious people, right? They may not be necessarily happy, but they may be happier than someone who's not actually practicing their religion.
And I would distinguish between happy and joyful. I think they're two different things.
That's very true. Yes.
Christians are joyful people, not necessarily always happy,
Right.
but we're joyful
Yes.
because, obvious reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so a lot of the internal disposition is everything. Happiness is not necessarily complete contentment or fulfillment. Happiness is I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm following the path that really is planned for me. And not only following it, but also embracing it. Right? That's what religion is designed for. It's designed to find that path that God has for you. And then you actually find fulfillment and happiness on the path. Right? So that's what religion is directed to. And I think that's been lost with a lot of people in society today. And so when we talk about evangelism, we almost have to talk about those distinctions, but also what religion can do for you. Right? I mean, so I would say I was a faithful person in my younger years. I wasn't necessarily religious. Just because I go to mass on Sunday doesn't mean I was a religious person. It wasn't until I understood that, though, that I actually found happiness. And I think I'm a joyful person, but I don't know if I was necessarily happy in the life I was living before I became a priest. Right? And not to say that every day is gumdrops and rainbows and puppy dogs, obviously, right? But I can see a distinct division between life I was living before and the life I'm living now. And this comes from a virtue of religiosity, right? So I think that's part of it. Some people would cite the sexual problems that we've had and the abuse issues. I don't know if that would be a convenient excuse. I don't necessarily think that actually is a fundamental reason, though. And the reason I say that is because, how should I put this? It's obviously, I'm going to always say this, it's always a tragedy when it happens at all. Regardless of if it's a clergy or a teacher or a coach or whatever, it's never good. And I think we have to be very clear about too, never taught by the church that's good to do that, right? It's sinful, it's immoral regardless. And I think what people tend to look at is, well, the fact that the church is this moral authority, that it happened in her ranks, and that decreases the legitimacy then of the moral authority of the church. And I would argue is that, well, I can see how you can come to that conclusion. But there's always been scandal in the church, right? If not sexual abuse, it could be simony, or it could be paying for indulgences, or it could be nepotism within the clergy, or it could be even concubinage and these other issues that you see in the church, right? Other forms of sexual abuse, including with minors. That's always been there, but it's never been accepted as something that should be done, and still isn't today. And if you look at the numbers, if you look at the percentage of priests and clergy that actually have engaged in this immoral action, it's far significantly less than the general population, which means you'll find more pedophile directed people just walking down the street than you would in the Catholic clergy of the clergy of the Catholic Church, and by like maybe 5 or 6 times more, right? But because of the growth, the vastness of the church, and because of her moral authority, and because of who she says she is, when these things happen, they tend to be magnified. And not that they shouldn't be, because it should be rooted out and should be cast away and should be dealt with. But I think that tends to skew people to not actually realize, okay, even though it's a problem, it's probably not as big a problem than in the public grade school just down the street. But that gets kind of glossed over, right? But I think there's also a rise in like this, again, going back to catechesis, purposeness. Like, so it was funny, I had a conversation with a woman who just turned 49 a couple weeks ago. And she called to kind of talk about becoming Catholic. She was never baptized. She held this kind of rejuvenation of the faith. What's actually funny is I think we have these 11 people because of the pandemic, that there's been this realization like, oh wait, maybe there's something more to this life, and that, you know, where are my actually priorities right now? But I think from this, she kind of had this understanding that I want to kind of at least engage in this and maybe see if this is what God may be calling me to do, and praise God. But come to find out, because I was trying to ask her, it was kind of late to actually come to the RCA class this year. And I was trying to figure out, like, do you have enough catechesis maybe to work one-on-one with you, or maybe we can figure that out. And she just told me that, yeah, you know, her family was all Catholic, but her parents decided that for her, they were just going to let her figure it out on her own. Right? And it's funny because I have family members in that same boat, right? That they're kind of raising their children, and they're saying, we're going to let them figure it out. And it's like, okay. And I can almost agree with that argument, regardless of the fact you're not really giving your child every opportunity for grace, which you know, as a parent, you should, right? Okay, but if you want to make the argument, okay, but what are you doing then to actually help your child to make an informed decision, right? Because if you're not practicing your faith or any faith whatsoever, well, how do you think that's going to actually impact your child and their decision making? And so I can understand if you take your child to maybe like a Hindu temple and then a Buddhist retreat center, and then maybe you take them to synagogue on a Friday night, and take them to the Catholic Church and Lutheran Church. You just rotate maybe every week through these different religions and do that. Okay, you can maybe make the argument that we're going to let them figure it out. All right, you're kind of opening your child up to these different aspects. Okay, but I would say maybe 99.999% of the time, that's not the case, right? And so I think, and I don't know exactly when that started. Some people may say because there's been a decrease in the population of clergy and religious that are teaching in Catholic schools. And so the catechesis has not been as instilled as it used to be. And we go talk about that also, about why that happens and what happened and whatever. But I think part of that also is recognition that it needs to start in the home. Right? That it's not my job. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's not the job of the teachers in the school and the principal here at St. Gabriel to teach your child about the faith. And really, it's not even my primary responsibility either. My primary responsibility is to help the parents teach their children about the faith. And it's the job of the teachers and the faculty over here to help the parents teach their children about the faith.
It's a hard job though.
Oh, of course it is.
Giving the low. So if a third live outside of the parish and don't come
Right.
here, and then you're looking at 30% mass number.
Right.
And
So what you're saying there is about out of those, let's say we have 300 families,
yeah,
100 living outside the boundary.
right.
We're getting another maybe 100 coming to mass on a regular basis.
Who may not be part of school.
Or not even that.
Yeah.
So in general, you have 100 coming here,
Yeah.
right? You have 100 maybe outside the parish boundary going, they should listen to 100 people. That's all of a third of the population.
Right.
That's not getting really any catechesis whatsoever.
So what do you do?
Well, yeah, that's the
There's
question,
lots of
right?
discussion
That's
now.
the question, right? Because when we talk about message evangelization, what do we do? Right? Because that's what they're all directing toward here. That the whole purpose of these next few years here in this Archdiocese, but I think this is even a general conversation for the church at large, especially in the first world, is what do we do? Right? I hope these sessions kind of help with that. That was one of my purposes of having these sessions with Father and Friends of the Faith, is to help people understand the faith in a better way. Adult faith formation, I think, is helpful in that. We have RCIA and these Sunday sessions for adult faith formation over the course of the winter, fall, winter, spring. I hope that kind of helps too.
Can you just go even if you're not?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Talking about on Sundays?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's open anyway.
Because
Yeah.
I'm on my second time now and it made a lot more sense. the
Yeah.
second, But I could see it making even more
Yeah.
sense again the third time.
But and also, part of that though is just engaging with these organizations within the parish too, right? We have a lot of great organizations here in the parish, but like, how many people are really engaging with them?
I think the flock notes help because I don't know if you all follow that.
Yeah,
but
flock
when I
notes.
see
So
more
I'll
of
say,
the-
I will say, flock notes help with communication. One of the, I know when I first got here, one of the biggest critiques has been lack of communication, because people don't necessarily take the bulletin home, right? The webpage is a good tool, but it wasn't necessarily maintained properly. Flock notes is kind of good because it pushes the information out rather than actually having to go to a place to get it. But even then, we're still seeing a similar numbers when it comes to population and engagement. Right? Now, it used to be, you'd have this organization called the Legion of Mary, whose main, and still is today, their principal job is to go out and evangelize people and actually go out to people's houses sometimes. And not necessarily like berate them for not going to mass, but engage them and say, how can we help you? Do you need something in the house or, you know, around here can help? Or, hey, maybe you want to come to the men's club. We got Holy Name Society, or there's other things going on, to encourage them to maybe in deeper participation. But also communicate to the pastor if there is a need in some of these households. All in confidentiality, but that was kind of the main job of the Legion of Mary. Their main job is evangelization. There's still Legion of Mary's legions out there. I think we have 2 here at St. Gabriel.
Really?
Yeah.
They used to come to our house, but haven't seen them in a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the priest, I mean, my wife said growing up, that everyone on the block always fixed enough food for dinner in case the priest would show up. And so you'd always have that extra. Food.
Yeah, and see, I think that's also a shift. And I don't know if that's because of the sexual abuse crisis, or there's been kind of shift in relationship with the parish priests. And so, in that same way, I think there's 2 ways of looking at that. We never really had priests come by our house when I was younger. Well, I shouldn't say we didn't have our parish priests come by very often when we were younger. And I don't necessarily why. Now, part of that could be we had 5 kids in the household, another mouth to feed would probably be more of a burden. That could be. My parents both worked, and so maybe they didn't necessarily have time to invite the priest out all the time. That could be too. And I think just like any other family, that's always the case, right? Families today usually have both parents working. There's a lot of time is very limited. And even especially for bigger families, the mouths need to be fed, right? So, okay. But also I think from the part of the parish priest, there's a little bit more of apprehension. I should say apprehension, maybe more a deeper discernment in going to people's houses, because you don't want to be put in a situation where you could be accused of something that could actually happen. It does come from lack of trust. I'm not going to say it's not. I know personally as a priest, one thing that's been a great struggle for me is I'm always hypersensitive to is there minors around, and do I have another adult with me if there is a minor around, right? A good example today, I was given a server test to a 4th grader, and we were doing it at the teacher's lounge down in the basement of the school. Now, we kept the door wide open. I stayed at least 8 feet, 9 feet away from the child at every moment. And I made everyone aware that I was there with somebody else and that there were other adults around, right? Even my own niece, I think I've told this story before, but a couple of years ago, I was over at my parents' house, and my nieces were over there with my dad. And we were sitting there watching TV. My dad got up and left the room for a minute and was like, okay, whatever. And then about 15 minutes later, comes in through the front door of the house. And I said, what are you doing? He's like, I just went out to get a paper. And I remember I told him, like, you can never do that to me again. Just like that. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I can't be alone with these kids. They're your nieces. Yeah, and I love them to death. I would never do anything. But what would happen, God forbid, if my brother-in-law decided to leave my sister
Mm.
All you have to say is, well, you touched them.
Mhm.
And if I were ever alone with them in that situation, I have no defense. And my sister would never see them again. Right? That's the kind of things we have to think about as priests. Right?
Wow.
And yeah, wow. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is wow. But and again, I would never do that to any of my nieces or nephews or anybody. But I have to be aware of what the situation is so that I can't necessarily be accused of something, even if I didn't do it. And so I think part of that could be the reason why you see maybe a lack of engagement in that aspect. I'm not saying this for everybody, but I think that could be a factor.
Makes sense.
When you say we have 2 Legion of Mary, is that 2 groups or 2 people?
2 groups.
2 groups.
Well, I think they're both kind of dwindling as far as people anyway. I think one of our legions actually has 4 members right now. The other legion, I don't really know if they have any. So yeah.
Did they meet during the pandemic?
I don't think they've met in person though. I think they made it virtually though, like Zoom and whatnot. Yeah. But I mean, that's the other thing though too. Don't necessarily need a Legion of Mary to actually evangelize either. Part of that is just kind of, and I think, and this is why I really encourage lay people on this, especially because I don't think lay people realize the power they actually have when it comes to these things, right? I, as a priest, I can go out and tell you, hey, Jesus loves you and what's the best things for you. And you'd have to be almost kind of like, oh, sure, of course, Father, you have to say that, right? Of course, well, you would say that, Father, because, well, that's what you're selling, right? That's your job. It is. Doesn't make it less true. It is true, but coming from me, it is a lot different than coming from a friend or a neighbor or someone that really knows you in a deeper way, right? That's also kind of why it's so hard sometimes to evangelize to the ones that are closest to us, right? Because there's already a level of familiarity. One of the hardest, and I get to rep my family here because I love them, but like, being here in St. Gabriel, it's amazing. Like, so my sister was here when I first got here. My parents now moved into the boundary. They're moving into the parish. My other sister was planning to move in eventually, but now she's not. I don't know. Maybe she might eventually. But it's incredibly hard to preach and to actually minister to your own family members because they didn't know me. They knew me before I was Father Mark or Deacon Mark or anyone else, right? And so there's, they're obviously from the gospel, prophets never welcome his own house. Well, the reason that is because, well, yeah, the people in Nazareth knew Jesus before he was even Jesus. They saw him grow up, right? So it's hard to actually take something new from somebody if you already kind of know them in a deeper way. But if I go to friends of mine who maybe knew me before I was a priest and I go talk to them about these things, especially, it maybe resonate a little more with them than it would be the people that know me the most, right? Because there's not a familiarity there. And so I encourage all lay people to really kind of, understand that power that you have. And again, it's not necessarily like going out and saying, hey, let me talk about Jesus and how much he loves you. Because really, especially if you already have don't have a relationship with that person, that's going to fall on deaf ears too, right? But maybe it's like, hey, let's go grab a bite to eat, or maybe go out to a movie, right? Or let's go for a ride or bike ride or something, or let's take a walk. That's how you evangelize. It's relational, right? It's actually establishing and building on that relationship that you can actually trust each other to the point where I can actually say, you know what, I want the best things for you, and here's what I think would be best for you. And even to a greater extent, living an authentic Christian Catholic life speaks more than any words you can ever say to anybody. You talk about happiness. If someone is joyful and happiness in the way they're living their life, that resonates with people. Because people start asking, why? Why are you so happy? Why are you so joyful? Well, I would hope that for any of us who really live in this life authentically would say, well, it's primarily coming from my faith. and my relationship with Jesus Christ. And that relationship is established through his church. So I think that's the key. So how do we do that? Right? That's a great question. This has been something that's kind of a factor. I know even time in the seminary, it's always been that question about how do we better evangelize and how do we do, I mean, there's many different methods, and part of that also is recognition of what we call the mode of the receiver. Has anyone ever heard that term before? No. So wait a minute, the mode of the receiver. So the way I kind of put this is, so we have here that have been raised Catholic their entire life. We have some converts in here, some of the raised. Oh yeah. So let me ask our cradle Catholics here. And maybe you guys might have different experience than I did, but when you were in grade school, how receptive were you to what was being taught in your religion class, or maybe even not religion? Let's go like maybe something didn't necessarily excite you as much as like other subjects. Let's like, what was Jane? Let me ask you, what was your least favorite subject in grade school?
Least favorite.
Or high school for that matter?
I mean, I didn't like some of the art stuff that we had to do, but I liked history, geography. What about math?
Yeah,
Math, it was hard, but I pursued it. I don't know.
Or okay, anyone least favorite subject? Anybody?
I didn't like math.
Yeah, okay. Let's say you had an amazing professor who knew everything there was to know about math. And Marilyn, you as, let's say, I don't know, fifth grader, even let's go deep, let's say second grader. You had this phenomenal teacher who could teach you anything that you possibly want to know. And when it came to math, would you listen to that person or not?
Yes,
You would listen to that person.
I would.
Do you think you would retain anything in what he said?
Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah. I'm sorry, someone say something online?
Yeah, I would retain it.
You would retain it, Mary Ellen? Okay. Well, you would hope so. But
Mhm.
I think if we're being honest with ourselves, our first, second, third, even eighth grade selves, there'd be certain things that even though maybe presented in the best way possible, we just were not in a state where we could receive it, right? It was like, this seems boring, or I have better things, or other things on my mind, or whatever else going on, right? We're talking about the mode, that's what we're talking about. It's really an internal disposition for the individual of how they receive certain things. And so when it comes to things like the faith, I think some of us actually, our maturity level is to the point where we're not necessarily ready to receive things in the way it should be presented to us. And so when we, especially for us, maybe we're cradle Catholics, who were taught the faith from a very early age, and maybe all the way through high school or even college, depending on where we're at in that reception, we may have received, we may not have. And so when things are kind of brought to us in adulthood, it almost seems new because we're in a different state than we were when we first heard these things, right? That may be what you experienced too, Lisa, right? When you went through the first time of RCA, you may be like, oh, this seems good. Okay, maybe it's also too much.
It's overwhelming.
Right. And so it was needed here at like 2 or 3 times before it's like, oh, wow.
That even happened with my son, is we had this debate in RCA because he's in 7th grade. And he learned something new in RCA because he understood it differently when it was first taught in grade school. So just within those few years,
Right.
say, oh, that's not what that means.
Right. Yeah, and I think we all go through that. And so repetition is actually not necessarily a bad thing, it's actually good. We have this mindset too that once we learn something, we're done with it. We don't have to go back and look at it anymore, right? We're done. I get that knowledge, I don't need it anymore, I'm good, I got it. But our experience also forms the way we use that knowledge. And so the Ignatian spirituality talks about what we call repetitive prayer. Going back to certain things multiple times in different states of our lives when we receive something new in the way we approach it. But I think we do that, we were called to do that even with our faith and our understanding of faith, our study of theology. That once we get past 8th, high school, grade school, college, there's kind of this mentality at that age when we graduate from there that, oh, well, I'm good. I don't have to go back and look at this stuff anymore. I'm done. Right? And whether that's math or science or whatever, I think we do the same thing with religion. That there's not this understanding that I need to actually develop in a deeper way my understanding of these things. I graduated. I'm done. Right? And so I think that's a big part of
That's why
how
you
much.
need to keep showing up for life. Because
Yeah.
if you stop showing up, you're not gonna take
Right.
advantage of those opportunities to grow.
It never ends,
Yeah.
right? We talk about our SAG people when they first come in, like, I always tell them in the first session that, look, you're coming here for 1 hour every Sunday for 24 Sundays. It is impossible for me to condense all 2,000 years of Catholic teaching down to those 24 hours. Same thing at the school. Your kids are going to school, maybe have religion class for an hour a day, for 5 days a week, for how many, 80 weeks, 80 weeks a year? Or not, sorry, wait, well, that's not right, I can't be right. 40 weeks, I don't know, whatever it is, 36 weeks. Impossible. Even for that time frame, over the course of 12 years, you can't do that. Right? And so it's meant to be, well, here's some building blocks for you, grow in on those, build on that.
I don't know that it was presented that way.
It wasn't for me either, Marilyn. It never was.
I think it was presented more or less like, when you're finished, you know it all.
Right. And I think that's the problem, is that we have a whole sacrament that's dedicated to that. It's called confirmation. Confirmation is a huge misunderstanding when it comes to what that actual sacrament is. Confirmation is a sacrament of maturity. And we're given the grace to kind of deepen our faith, grow in that knowledge, and grow in that love of God. That's what the fact of the sacrament is. So we're never done learning about God, learning about Jesus in our lives, growing closer with Him. Because to know God is to love Him. And we can't fully know God, which means we can't fully love Him. Right? And that's all right, because of our limited natures, right? We will eventually, because we're going to be with Him in heaven. But we have to take those steps here on earth to grow in that understanding. Because if we don't, well, we're just going to stand still.
So you're saying confirmation is really just starting, not being done.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
you're mature enough
Which-
to
which-
start to retain.
Right, which is the mindset. I think the mindset of a lot of our 8th graders is once
Yeah.
they're done with confirmation, they're done. And that's not the case at all. It's completely the opposite.
That's when you receive the Holy
Yeah.
Spirit, and that's
To actually
when-
grow in this knowledge and understanding.
Yeah.
That's what the grace gives you, is this level of understanding and knowledge. You can grow from it. Not that you're done. You're just starting out. And that never ends. As we mature as people, we all mature physically, emotionally, intellectually. Our faith should mature too. And that's what the sacrament, that's the effect of the sacrament, allows us to do that well.
So then would the question be, why aren't the unengaged parishioners coming to a prayer group or a Bible study
Yeah.
or one of these?
Again, I think it comes down to this understanding that at the time when they were taught these things, they weren't able to receive it. And I think once there's this big mentality now that once confirmation is over, that's it. That happened in my generation too.
Mm.
I don't need to worry about it anymore. I don't have to come to mass, I'm done. I don't have to learn any more of the stuff, I'm done. And so then you won't necessarily see them again until, well, maybe 20 years from then, or 10, or 15 years from then, they want to get married. They come back to church, I want to get married. Oh, well, where you been for the last 15 years?
So I would think that's a lesson as part of the confirmation to tell them that.
So, but again, in that same
That they don't
breath,
understand.
where's the motive of the receiver?
Yeah.
I think there's a failure on the part of education as well. Because my son, who's young adult now, his friends are starting to get married.
Mhm.
And he went to Catholic high school. He said, none of my friends really care about their faith. And knowing his friends growing up, all of their parents were, for the most part, fairly devout Catholics. So what happened? Why did the school not nurture their faith to the point where they're getting married outside the faith, outside the church?
Well, I have a theory on that. And I think part of it stems from you had a fundamental shift in the 60s and 70s from classes in school were being taught by habited religious, not necessarily habited, but religious and clergy, to you started having more of a lay population come and teach. Now, that's not necessarily bad, but when it came to like levels of faith, okay, well, now you're having someone that was trained, maybe has a master's in divinity or theology that was teaching the faith. Now you have someone who doesn't have that background. May have been hired to teach social studies or math, but now is asked to teach religion course because Sister Mary Frances left the order. Is no longer there anymore.
Or she aged out.
Or she aged out, right? And there's no one taking Sister Mary Frances' place because that order, as for some whatever reason, is now declining and they can't staff those positions anymore, right? There's a theological adage goes, as goes specifically the religious orders, so goes the priesthood.
Well, I remember an example in the high school where there was a group of kids that were getting very devout, and they were meeting on a regular basis, and at some point, they started to be mocked by the administration for being too serious about their faith. And it's like when people, especially at that age, get so serious, they have a lot of questions. They want to learn, and they get serious. And the philosophy class was great. And my son loved that. But it's like if you start getting too serious, then oh well, you're crazy.
Yeah, yeah, and that's also too. That's also not to say that the clergy and even the sacramental life faculty and staff weren't taking it seriously either. It's convenient, but I think it's true to say that there is a spirit of Vatican II that really took hold in culture. And the spirit of Vatican II was in stark contrast to actually what Vatican II was established and what actually came out of it. I know we've had discussions in the past in sessions about what Vatican II actually did and what the effects of it. But I think that's part of it. I think that Vatican II kind of opened new pathways of like, well, does a priest really need to be celibate? Does a priest really need to be a man? What actually defines a marriage, right? These things were held for centuries in the Catholic faith. Questions were raised and was stemming from an age where really the authority was being questioned, not just in the church, but secularly, right? There was a lot of upheaval because of the Vietnam War. There was a sexual revolution going on in college campuses. That all kind of stirred into this understanding, well, okay, things are changing in the world. Well, I think the church looks like the church is doing this change too. They're getting with the times. They're having this council, this moment in history where all these other things are changing. So logically speaking, well, then that means the church is going to change. Now, I don't know why you would conclude that because for 2,000 years before that, it never has.
The world usually changes around the church.
Correct.
And when you start changing the church, that's the problem.
Right.
Because then it's a moving target. You
Right.
have to have something that's stable and let society go on around it.
And I think it's fair to say there was a failure on the part of the church to properly implement what actually came out of Vatican II, which is why you see this kind of propagation of these ideas and these kind of concepts, these mindsets that really impact us today. I think what you saw with this understanding, you saw a lot of young men and women enter convents and seminaries thinking that, oh, well, great, things are going to change. I can get married after I get ordained, or maybe I don't even have to be a man to be ordained. So when we're enter the convent, they better become priests. And then what happens is the church says, well, no, that was never part of this deal, and people become frustrated. So what they do is they end up leaving the orders, they leave the priesthood, they leave these, and then you have this mass exodus because your expectation was not met. And whenever there's an expectation that's not met, there's always frustration and anger, right? When in reality, you shouldn't have the expectation. You should be discerning these things properly with a proper spiritual director, with proper prayer life, with proper disposition, because it's not what you want. It's what God wants for you. And that's not just discernment for religious life or holy orders. That's anything in your life. And that's part of the understanding of what the church provides for you. It's a means to actually discern properly what God wants for you. Because when you follow that, you're going to be happy. You're going to be joyful. When you start rejecting and have your own opinions, your own decisions, what's actually supposed to happen in your life, that's when the frustration, the anger, that's where you start to leave things and start become vulnerable to these aspects of the world. And that's what happened, I think.
Can you talk about what Benedict famously said, the church may need to get smaller?
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Yeah.
Okay.
So you guys all know Pope Benedict XVI, right? So, among other reasons, I think he's going to be a doctor of the church someday. But he saw this. I don't think he was the first to see this. I think this kind of started before him. But you know, one of the aspects of a prophet is not that they actually predict the future. What they do is they just tell you the logical conclusion of what's going on at the time, right? And I think Benedict does that surprisingly well. And what he said was that there'll be a time where there's not going to be a thriving, fruitful church anymore. It's going to be a remnant of what it used to be. And so, in other words, you're not going to see hundreds of baptisms and weddings and conversions. What you're going to see is a shrinking church to where the population will be so small, but that population is going to be very strong because they're going to be faithful. They're going to have this understanding. They're going to grow in their knowledge of God, their love of God, and that's going to maintain the church. And we shouldn't be surprised by this because it's happened throughout all of history. Like we started the conversation, the church thrives where there's crisis and when there's, issues. And so we shouldn't be surprised to see the church decline here because, well, there's not a lot of crisis and issues going on. Right? Does that mean the church is going to die? Well, of course not. The church is always going to be there. It's always the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. We're assured of that by Jesus himself. But that doesn't mean we can't shrink. We're not going to get smaller. And we see that with the population of the people of the covenant. The people in Israel, right? They've been decreasingly over time. Now we might say, well, that's just a fulfillment of the prophecies that God is establishing, his covenant even with the church today. That we as the new Israel are taking the reins, not necessarily taking the reins, but growing with our brothers and sisters in the Jewish faith. But also there's a level of rejection where that may be indicating the decline in the Jewish people. So we shouldn't be surprised when these things happen, right? Because it's happened before. It's going to keep on happening in a cyclical motion, right? That's all throughout the history of the world. We've seen the cyclical notion of God does something, provides some grace, and man initially receives it. They reject it eventually because they get too full themselves or don't grow in that faith and understanding. God, for lack of a better word, punishes, or maybe provides. I would say probably a better word would be provide opportunity for conversion. Man does, God forgives, and the cycle continues. Now, of course, we would say Jesus broke that cycle of the Old Testament, right? Because now we actually are. The difference is we can now be with our Lord in heaven where before they couldn't, right? That faith is necessary, our merits are necessary. Where before that, no matter what man could do, they would never be able to get in heaven without Jesus coming, with a few exceptions. But I think that the remnants, we're kind of going into that time period, I think. What was it? Cardinal, boy, who was the cardinal in Chicago before Supich?
George?
Yeah, George. Yeah, Cardinal George. He had a great line. He was famously said something too that Cardinal George said, "I'm going to die in my bed. My successor will die in prison, and his successor will die in the village square." And that kind of indicates the attitude of the world towards the church. And we're seeing that today, right? The persecution is growing, right? And we shouldn't be surprised at that. If anything, we should welcome it. and find joy in it. Because that means that we're living our faith authentically. Right? Because what happens is like, it matters, but ultimately it's the life to come that really is the fulfillment of this life. So anything that really happens here today and now, it should all lead to that. So even let's say they enact a law tomorrow that Catholics should stop practicing their faith. Okay, well, I guess I'm either going to prison or die. All right. So I'm not going to stop. We all need to kind of have that attitude. And that's kind of what Benedict was talking about, right? That there may be people that will turn away because it gets too hard. But the ones that are left over are the ones that are going to maintain and persevere. And that's going to lead to their thriving in the future. Yeah. So I know it's not the most happiest discussion, but I think it's necessary to have this discussion anyways.
So do you know what the number of Catholics is today versus what it was 50 years ago?
Yeah, so that number was given to us also. Around the 1950s, I believe the total number of Catholics was somewhere in the 570,000 era, which for a population of 1 million was a good
In the
percentage.
US.
In St. Louis.
Oh, in St. Louis.
Now we're down to about 410,000. Now we're still the largest denomination in the area. But we went from like a 50% population, of Catholics to now down to about 25.
And what's the largest growing denomination? The nuns?
Yeah,
N-O-N-E.
NONES. We call it the rise of the nuns. NONES. And what's funny is a lot of those are former Catholics.
Yeah,
So
again, the kids of our friends who were devout Catholics, their kids are choosing not to have their kids baptized.
right.
Well, but there's so many, I mean, people today are just into themselves, it's all the
That's right.
technology, they don't have to communicate with anybody, they don't like community, they don't like any of that
No.
stuff, and so.
Well, yeah, and maybe and this is not just Catholicism is not the only one that's suffering. Every denomination, every Christian denomination, and really every religion in general is suffering from this too. Maybe Islam may be growing, Muslims might be growing, but I think it's primarily coming from breeding. Anything else? There's a lot of conversions more. I mean, you also see that with Mormons. I think Mormons tend to have bigger families, and so they have more growth in that respect, but they're still not necessarily converting people. But I think everyone's kind of suffering in that respect. But yeah, you see more and more people unaffiliated nowadays than there have been ever before.
So wouldn't a Catholic church that has a school attached to it, wouldn't that school be the most logical place to start? The low-hanging fruit, and chose to send them to a Catholic school and they have some level of engagement with the church, going to school mass? And
You would, so logically, I think that'd be correct. I think the problem you have, so for instance, here in St. Louis, instead of going here, which alternative?
Oh, in the city.
Now, I can see that argument maybe like if you were in South County or West County. I think here in the city, it's sort of like, I don't know. Right. So that's more local. I think in general, you probably can make that argument, right? But also too, what we tend to see, and this is common everywhere. Wherever you see a parish school, how should I put this? In general, I shouldn't say for everybody, but in general, the parish school is not looked at as a ministry of the parish. It's looked on as a separate community.
So it shouldn't be, right?
It shouldn't be.
Sherry Massman
It
and I were
shouldn't be.
talking about
It
that.
shouldn't be at all. But for some reason, and maybe that's lack of engagement. I don't know. There's an understanding that the school and the parish are separate. Now, I can tell you from my experience growing up Catholic in a Catholic school, Catholic church, Now, with our family, that wasn't necessarily the case, but we were also, would go to mass every Sunday, right? We wouldn't necessarily engage in other aspects of the parish, but we went to the parish school, went to mass on Sunday, contributed what we contributed. That was kind of our engagement, right? And that was probably even considered maximum for the time, right? Because what you tend to happen there, you have people that would maybe engage with, like, let's say, men's club and all these women's groups or whatever, wouldn't darken the door on Sunday mass, but they would send their kids to the school and they would engage everything else. So the same, but you also have people that would engage in the school and that would be it. Right? That was my experience growing up in Heart of Mary, just down the street, right? When I was assigned to St. James the Greater, that was at the same year they decided that they were going to at least attempt to close the school. And the argument I heard from a lot of people about not closing the school is because, well, my grandparents were here, I went here, blah, 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 blah. I said, my response to that would be, well, so you have two options then. You either have more kids or give more money. Which would you rather do? Well, then it would shift from, well, okay, but the school is the heart of the community. We have so many converts come from the school and it's just the heart of the community. So my response would be, well, that's sad. Because if the tabernacle is not the heart of the community, it doesn't matter how many buildings we have over. And that usually shut down the conversation at that point.
Is the St. Gabe's youth group, is that newer? Because I'm only just seeing, are they just getting louder?
Yeah, so both and.
That's
So the
interesting,
history, praise God, we have Sarah Henderson here as our youth minister. She's done a wonderful job so far. She has started in August, and the youth group started up again in October. But before that, we used to have the South City Youth Group, which actually met over at the Bird. And I think that started off, but that was kind of a regional youth group. And again, it didn't have a parochial affiliation. It was more kind of regional, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? But there was lack of engagement. You can have maybe tons of reasons why that happened. I don't know all the details, but part of maybe the discussion could be part of the youth group is supposed to be formative for the young and engage them in social aspects. And so when you have a majority of your population in a region that's going to Catholic school and then going to Catholic high school anyway, they may already have that engagement. That's when maybe that was part of it. I don't know. Maybe it could be certain personalities. I don't know. But regardless, that folded up right before COVID hit. They lost some funding. There was kind of lack. I think when I went to some meetings over there may have been maybe one Gabriel kid going there out of a number of 10 that was represented by 13 different parishes. So you have a lot of parishes that were contributing to this, but that they weren't necessarily, their kids weren't going to it. And so as a pastor, you have to make a very practical decision. Well, I'm paying money to have this happen, yet none of my kids are engaging. Why am I doing this? And so funding was pulled. That collapsed. We decided actually before COVID hit to start looking for a youth minister, but then COVID hit. And so that put everything on hiatus because we weren't sure about how that was going to affect budget and everything else. So fortunately, though, we were able to get back on track and hire someone this past August. So that just started up again in October. Yeah.
Years ago, there was CYC,
Right.
and that went away somehow.
Well, and I think it was in talking about like different ways of evangelism. It's like one thing that we talk about a lot in the seminary is a lot of times evangelization from the Archdiocese was directed, I think in general, but it usually tracks the different one sex or the other. So like, for instance, there was a time in the Archdiocese when I first came back, if I had a young single male friend that was looking for a good Catholic girl, there were probably about 10 places I could send that person, right? Because all the things from the Archdiocese was kind of directed more towards women, right? I think the mindset may have been, well, if the women come, the men will follow. That could be, it's like ladies' night at a bar, right? I mean, I don't know what. maybe that's the case. So a lot of the discussion we had in the seminary was how do we engage men, right? Because if you look at going back to these understanding, like, why do people engage, why do they not? Well, a big stat that I think is overlooked and a lot of people don't hear is that, so why are people falling away from the faith? Why are people, not necessarily practicing their faith when they're older? Well, part of that, and there may be some, outliers, but there was a statistic came out that of people that engage in their faith, an abundance of majority, like somewhere in the 90 percentile, found that they were engaged in their faith because their fathers were. That if their fathers were practicing their faith all throughout their childhood and even into their adulthood, the children maybe would break away for a while, but eventually they would come back and start practicing their faith again. The mother could be the most devout person ever, maybe a new Saint Monica or Blessed Mother, but it didn't matter. The number came from the dad. And so to that respect, we're like, well, how do we engage guys more, right? Because if we're saying that people are engaging their faith because their fathers are, well, you go to these things, Archdiocese for young adults, it's all girls, it's all women. So that's kind of a big part of it too. Anecdotally, what we tend to find when I was growing up, it used to be that only boys would serve the mass, right? Until I was about in 7th grade. And then Archbishop May, it may have been after I don't know if he was actually in.
It was under regalia.
Well, I think it was in transition. There was a time where between May and regalia, there was a year or two there where May was the Archbishop, but he wasn't necessarily making all the decisions. So there was asked, like, could girls start serving? And the answer came back, yeah. What you found though was that as more and more girls started serving, the boys tended to not stop doing it. And now I will say, is from my perspective as a priest, the girls do a better job. They really do. They're more attentive. They're more like attentive to what you're telling them. They're more kind of mature already. So I think there's like a level of that. But if you ask any guy in the seminary now, where the call started for them, I would say 99% would say as a server. Right. Now that's not necessarily correlative between people dropping out of the faith, but I think also too that we talk about vocations. That's not only just for priests, but I think people find their vocations in those services too. Right. So we tend to maybe, again, with the feminine genius, trying to approach that in a way that can kind of be engaged and encourage leadership in the church by women, which is good. I'm not saying that's bad. I think it should be, right? Every man needs a woman. Even church leaders need women, right? We all need the women to hold us accountable and keep us in line, and especially, but also there's a different mentality that's necessary when it comes to governance. But I think we've kind of skewed so much, really focusing on that, they've kind of lost the whole understanding of, okay, well, what are we doing for the guys? Right? And I don't want to sound sexist, or I'm not trying to be. I'm just saying that we need both and, but we also need men to step up and actually start living their faith. And so how do we engage them more?
The Holy Name Society is a pretty big group here, isn't it?
Yes.
Are they more social than?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, look, and that's not bad.
Yeah.
Well, you need that. The Holy Name is good in that respect. But I don't know if there's something that's engaging the faith aspect of that for men here, or anywhere in the Archdiocese.
They have an open prayer.
Huh?
They have an
They
open
do.
prayer.
They do.
They have barbecues on their Acts retreat.
Yeah, barbecues every
I was like,
meeting.
Well,
barbecue.
They used to barbecue for the women when the women went on their Acts retreats.
Oh, that doesn't happen anymore.
Till a female director said she didn't want any men up there during the female Acts retreat, which in my opinion is a bunch of nonsense.
I think Acts retreat, I think are really great ways of engaging. They really are.
Yeah.
One thing we were kind of experimenting with in seminary was we called St. Joseph workshops. And really what they were kind of opportunities for men to kind of learn different aspects or hobbies like fishing or hunting, or even like home repair, car repair. It would be put on by the seminarians, and you would sign up for it. And I wonder if that's maybe a way to engage in a better way. I don't know.
For me, I think the biggest challenge is how, like, because I'm a doer, like, where to start. So even when Aaron and I did the summer camp, it's like, who do we go to? Do we have school to go to church? Who makes the
Right.
decision? What's up to us? What do we need to get approval? And the same thing with the St. Matthews, like, what's the pathway to?
So
Be active.
the answer to that is always through the pastor. It's always through the pastor. Pastor always should be.
Pastor being who, Monsignor?
Monsignor. Should always be the one that knows what's going on and gives the authority to do what they got to do. For permission for that. The pastor is the leader of the parish. That's it. He's
I
it.
just don't know that many that would have an idea to evangelize a group of people, and go to him and say, I want to do that. I mean, maybe that happens.
And see,
I don't know.
and that could be part of the discussion maybe too, like, why?
Well, but I think a great example of that is Women of the Well, the Women at the Well. That
Yeah.
just started in the last few years. I think that's,
Is that the bucket brigade? Are they the same?
Yeah.
They're the same, right?
Yeah.
You want?
No,
what Joni says, that's really
Yeah,
nice
Yeah.
thing to go to.
and they kind of have a balance of religious activities, social activities, I think.
Well, my understanding, and again, I got kicked out the first time I went back, but
Would you want to change it?
I got
No.
the, I got the scoop on.
my
that.
understanding, no, it's always been kind of faith-based though. So there's always aspects of the faith they always talk about,
Right.
which is great.
Right,
Now, I don't know if the same approach would work for men. Because if let's say I could have, let's say, Dr. Peter Kreeft come and talk to men of the parish, right? Most of them probably wouldn't know who he is and probably wouldn't come anyway, because why? Right? Then you got other things to do. But I think there has to be some social aspect of it that kind of draws, but it could be faith-based. So like, maybe when we talk to them about car repair, we talk about St. Isidore, right? Or something like that, talk about how maybe computer programming, and talk about, St. Carlos Acuto, right? I think it can be something that can engage in that way. I think the Women of Well do a really well job. I don't know if the same model though and applying for men is gonna work though.
it sounds like in a corporation, right? You can't force the culture top down. It
Right.
has to come from
Exactly.
the group.
And it should be. But what I'm saying is, so your question was like, who to go to? The pastor should always be open to any suggestion and kind of like be able to facilitate anything that it can be taught from the lady. And again, that goes with the power of the lady. You guys have much more authority and much more power than I do as an associate. If you want to do something as a lady, you can. You just have to let Monsignor know, right? But yeah. That's kind of part of being a good pastor, is you kind of let people develop these things and grow in these things. You oversee it, of course, to make sure it doesn't go off track, but that's kind of your main job.
Didn't Women at the Well invite the Archbishop without telling the podcast?
We're not going to talk about that. That's in history. We're not going to bring old history on this one. Yeah. But again, part of that though is understanding that the communication is always key. Communication always better, that's for sure. But yeah, I think that's important when we talk about these things like evangelization, though. It's always important to recognize like there is a leader of this parish. They need to be at least keyed in what's going on, right? But yeah, grassroots, good. That should be fostered and developed, right, under the leadership of the pastors. Yeah. All right. Well, it's a little bit after 8 o'clock now, so hope this was helpful, beneficial.
Good, yeah.
And we'll see. We got Father the Father next week, so hopefully see you guys then. If not, have a good week. See you on Sunday.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming,
Good to
guys.
see you all. See you Sunday.
Bye, everyone.
We had a pretty good group today.
Yeah.